let's let's be completely honest. I do want Kirk Cousins to be traded. It doesn't look very possible right now. It doesn't look possible. And you look at just the start where the Vikings brought in Kevin O'Connell as their head coach. I mean, Vikings brought in Kevin O'Connell, and according to Adam Schefter, one of the reasons Kevin wanted to get the job in Minnesota was because he already had an established relationship with Kirk Cousins, because he already liked Kirk Cousins as he was his quarterbacks coach when he was with Washington, now the Washington Commanders. When he was with Washington, they already had this established relationship, which is why I believe, which is why I was mentioning how this is a very, very good head coaching hiring, because it's so important to have a good relationship between your quarterback and head coach. And you see this around the league. I mean, just look at the two Super Bowl teams, for example, with Matthew Stafford and Sean McVay, Zach Taylor and Joe Burrow. Like, it just shows how important it is to have a good relationship with your quarterback, build around that quarterback, make him your franchise guy, and be a pass heavy team. I mean, just look at the two teams in the Super Bowl, for example. That's what I want the Vikings to do. And I mentioned how this was my top pick for a Vikings head coaching candidate when it came down to the final four candidates for the Vikings. I mentioned many times how I was very, very fond of the Vikings bringing in Kevin O'Connell. So Kevin O'Connell does like Kirk Cousins. And from what they've mentioned so far and from what we've heard so far, the Vikings will stick with Kirk Cousins at least through the 2022 season. Now, while I absolutely hate this decision and I don't like it at all, I can see where they're coming from. Because if you look at the Vikings right now, look at even just the Rams. I mean, the Rams won a Super Bowl with Matthew Stafford. Like, Matthew Stafford's a good quarterback, don't get me wrong, but he's on the same level as Kirk Cousins, where he's a good quarterback who can win a Super Bowl, just needs to play under the right system. Matthew Stafford and Kirk Cousins, I believe right now, are on the exact same tier of quarterbacks. And you know what? They're both above tier than Ryan Tannehill. I mean, just look at Ryan Tannehill. They had the best record in the NFL. And again, he was just not an amazing quarterback. You can just put him in the right situation and you can be a Super Bowl contending team. So look at the Vikings right now. They've mentioned that the Vikings will likely stick with Kirk Cousins through the 2022 season. Do not play Kirk Cousins next year on his current contract. It would be so stupid to play Kirk Cousins on his current contract, where he has $45 million of guaranteed money in 2022. That's a $45 million cap hit, which is the third most in the NFL. The only two quarterbacks to have a higher cap hit than Kirk Cousins is Aaron Rodgers and somehow Matt Ryan. Oh my gosh, the Falcons are not in a good situation right there. But Aaron Rodgers and Matt Ryan both have a higher cap hit than Kirk Cousins, meaning Kirk Cousins is going to be making more money than Patrick Mahomes, meaning Kirk Cousins is going to be making more money than just about every quarterback that's better than Kirk Cousins. So you look at it right now, and it's such a bad situation the Vikings are in, to where if the Vikings do play Kirk Cousins in 2022, which is most likely going to happen from the sources that we have between with Tom Pelissero and what Adam Schefter has said. It missed my name. His name missed my mouth right there. But from what they've said, it looks like the Vikings are going to stick with Kirk Cousins at least through the 2022 season. Do not play him under his current contract and give him an extension for one more year. Now, here's why. Because I do want the Vikings to trade away Kirk Cousins, but if they do play him, they cannot play him under this one contract. They need to extend him for one more year. You extend him for one more year, you give him $70 million of guaranteed money through 2 years. That's a $35 million average annual salary for 2 years. Again, I don't want this to happen, but if it's happened, this is the second best scenario, that the Vikings have to extend Kirk Cousins for one more year if they play him if they play him in 2022. So this is $35 million of guaranteed money in 2022 and 2023. We know the guy Kirk Cousins is, to where he will only sign a contract if it's fully guaranteed money, which I think is so stupid and ridiculous. It just hurts your team, because what if you get injured? I mean, what happens then? You still are making your money? I mean, I hate the guaranteed money that Kirk Cousins demands. It makes me so furious because, yes, he's a very healthy quarterback. I understand he might not get injured, but we see healthy quarterbacks get injured all the time. Look at Russell Wilson, who played, what was it, like 10 seasons without getting injured and just missed a majority of this last season, and they had Geno Smith step in. Like, you have to factor in the fact that he's a quarterback. He's going to get hit in just about every game. He will likely No, he's not. He hasn't had a bad injury throughout his entire career, but you have to factor in the fact that he can get injured, and him getting this much guaranteed money makes me angry. However, at the end of the day, I would much rather have this happen than them play him under a $45 million cap hit in 2022. So it's $10 million less than what he would be making in 2022 if they do give him the 1 year extension where he's making $70 million of guaranteed money through 2 years. If this happens, the Vikings have $10 million to work with. That'll put them under the cap where they can actually bring back Tyler Conklin, where they can focus on free agency and bring in some young guys. Now, I've said how I'm not a fan of this, but I want to talk about this because this is the most likely situation with the Vikings right now, that they do extend Kirk Cousins and have him on a 2 year contract. But here's the thing. Even though the Vikings have mentioned that they're going to stick with Kirk Cousins, that doesn't mean that they're going to stick with Kirk Cousins. What I mean by this here is what the Vikings could be doing here, and we want to talk about this as a possibility. What O'Connell and Kwesi could be doing here is getting leverage in trade. Because if you go out into the very start of offseason, which now the NFL season is done, if you go into the NFL offseason and immediately say that Kirk Cousins is up for trade, you lose a lot of your trade leverage, meaning you're going to get a lot less than what you would get if you wanted to keep Kirk Cousins. See what I'm saying here? Where the Vikings are likely going to want to keep Kirk Cousins. However, if you get an offer, say let's be realistic here. Say the Denver Broncos offer you 2 first-round draft picks. How are you not going to take that? In what world do you have the Denver Broncos call you up and say, we'll give you 2 first-round draft picks for Kirk Cousins, and you somehow say no? In what world does that make sense? So let's see here. Even though the Vikings want to stick with Kirk Cousins, it doesn't mean that they're going to stick with Kirk Cousins, is what I'm saying here. Because you can get so much more from 2 first-round draft picks from the Broncos than you can from just having Kirk Cousins. And I want to make myself very clear that you can get 2 first-round draft picks for Kirk. Because if you look at even just the past trades, you'll notice a trend amongst a lot of the previous quarterbacks that were traded, and you'll notice a trend and say, oh, they were over traded on. I mean, even just look at Matthew Stafford. I believe they gave up 3 first-round draft picks or something like that for Stafford. Kirk Cousins and Stafford are on an even tier level, and the Rams gave up a lot. Why? Because they're a boomer bust team. Why? Because they were a Super Bowl winning now team, which is when they just won a Super Bowl. So that's it worked in the Rams' favor, and it also worked in the Lions' favor. Even just look at Carson Wentz. Kirk is much better than Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz was worth a 1st and a 3rd round draft pick. Look at the Vikings, who traded for Sam Bradford years and years ago, when we traded for Sam Bradford and gave up a 1st round draft pick. Like, you can get 2 1st round draft picks for Kirk Cousins, and I don't see a situation where the Vikings can honestly get an offer for 2 1st round draft picks and turn it down. Because you look at a lot of the quarterbacks or a lot of the teams in the AFC who are a quarterback away from competing, they can't simply go ahead and sign someone in free agency. They can't. This is not the same free agency class that we had 2 years ago where Tom Brady and Drew Brees were entering free agency. This is a free agency class where the best quarterback entering it is Marcus Mariota. Not a Super Bowl winning quarterback right there. Transitional quarterback at best. Now, you can argue, obviously, Ryan Fitzpatrick, but you can't just dismiss the fact that he gets injured every year on top of that. And then you look at the draft, and you can't just simply draft a quarterback and somehow make a Super Bowl out of it in your first season. Like, this is not going to happen in this upcoming quarterback class, which is why a lot of teams could be looking to trade. One of the teams is obviously the Denver Broncos. You have the Cleveland Browns. You have the Pittsburgh Steelers. These are just 3 teams in the AFC that could look to trading for a quarterback. Look at the ones in the NFC. I mean, the Carolina Panthers. The Carolina Panthers, if they get a quarterback like Kirk Cousins, they'll win their division with how easy that division is. Sean Payton and Tom Brady are both leaving the NFC South. I mean, Carolina Panthers can take control of that division with Kirk Cousins. And you look at a lot of teams around the league who can trade for Kirk Cousins, and I don't see how you can get an offer for 2 first-round draft picks and say no. And that is what I say. Even though the Vikings say that they're going to stick with Kirk Cousins, I don't believe that means that they're going to stick with Kirk Cousins, because I can't see why turning down a trade like that would make any sense. It's a win-win-win for the Vikings to trade away Kirk Cousins. However, with that being said, it doesn't look promising. With what we've heard from Kevin O'Connell so far and what Adam Schefter and Tom Pelissero have said, they've pointed at the Vikings wanting to keep Kirk Cousins. As let's not forget, one of the big reasons why Kevin O'Connell came into this organization was because he liked Kirk Cousins, was because he had an already established relationship with Kirk Cousins, and that's why he's coming into this organization. Not just because it's a head coaching gig, but because it's a head coaching gig with Kirk Cousins as their quarterback. So this is why I'm talking about extending as the next best thing, pretty much, for the Vikings. Because you don't want to have Kirk Cousins play under his current contract where he has a $45 million cap hit, and after the season, let him walk in free agency. You want to get the most out of Kirk that you can get out of it. You want to squeeze what you can out of it. And if you put him on a 1-year extension. It'll save you $10 million in this next upcoming season. And after the season, you can still trade away Kirk Cousins. You're not just going to let him walk in free agency. You can trade him away. You don't want it to be a tag and trade where you franchise tag him and then trade him away. That situation is a little too risky, and you don't want that to happen. Now, with that being said, the thing is, I do want the Vikings to trade away Kirk Cousins. I've said this many times. However, right now, the most possible situation that happens with the Vikings is that they do extend Kirk Cousins and play him under this next year and maybe one more year. That right now is looking like the most possible situation that the Vikings are in. Not only that, but if we do have Kirk Cousins on our under contract with us in 2022, we're winning our division. With Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams and Devondre Campbell likely out of Green Bay, outside of that, I mean, look at the Bears and Lions. I mean, they're the Bears and the Lions. Like, we're winning our division next year if Rodgers is out of Green Bay. Even if just Devontae Adams and Devondre Campbell are out of Green Bay, we are winning our division. Which is why I understand why you would want Kirk to play with contract next year. However, what I don't understand is if the Vikings get an offer for 2 first-round draft picks for Kirk Cousins, I don't understand how they wouldn't take that. And that's what I say many times on. Yes, the Vikings want to keep Kirk Cousins, but that doesn't mean that they're going to keep Kirk Cousins. And that's what I'm saying here is where they get more leverage by saying that they want to keep Kirk Cousins than if they were just trying to sell him off.